Hello, welcome to the second video in my overview of core medical device standards. In this video, we'll introduce the critical subject of managing risk. A few caveats about this video series before we get going. First off, most of these standards only apply to medical devices, particularly to medical devices with embedded hardware and software. If your device is not a medical device, then different standards will apply. However, we will review certain non-medical specific standards that medical devices normally do need to meet, such as those from the U.S. Federal Communications Commission. Second, these are the core standards, but some devices need to meet other standards that are more specific to what they do. And finally, the material presented here is only my opinion, and only in a general sense. While these videos should be a good basis for understanding the standards framework, you should make sure to get expert advice that addresses your specific situation. The first thing that pops into people's minds when they think about developing medical devices is something along the lines of, "Isn't that risky? It's scary to think that people can get hurt if the design is bad." Regulators are no different than anyone else. Risk is the first thing that pops into their heads when they think about medical devices. As a result, quantifying and managing risk is at the heart of medical device standards. It's all about balancing risk and cost. All devices have risks associated with them, and we can always reduce risk. We can always make a device a little safer, a little better. But that generally means we spend more money and take more time on R&D, and it often means increasing the manufactured cost of a device as well. On the other hand, if something bad happens because we didn't reduce a risk, and say people get hurt unnecessarily, not reducing that risk could turn out to be much more expensive than reducing the risk would have been. The challenge here is in knowing where to draw the line. It's in determining which risks are acceptable because they are very small, or because they would be too costly to reduce relative to their severity, and which should be reduced because they're either too serious or they are cost-effective to reduce. Understanding and managing risk is at the core of medical device standards and regulations. Risk comes into play in a couple of ways within standards. First off, there is the general risk associated with a device. For example, we all recognize that a ventilator, which allows a person to breathe, has a greater inherent risk associated with it than does a tongue depressor. As we'll see, regulations and standards take these inherent risks into account. Basically, devices with inherently higher risks need more planning, more review, and more testing. Next, there are the specific risks associated with any given device design due to failures, such as hardware or software failures. These need to be identified and reviewed for each individual product, and decisions made as to whether they should be mitigated or not. Regulators assign a general classification to each device based largely on its inherent likelihood of bad things happening. In the U.S., our FDA designates a device as being Class 1, 2, or 3, based mostly on the risk they perceive around that device. For example, if developers are careless, implantable defibrillators can easily cause many bad things to happen, ranging from stopping a working heart by incorrectly shocking it, to not shocking a heart that needs a restart, to causing infection or other problems by not being sterile, or by using materials that are not biocompatible, and so forth. Because it's relatively more challenging to ensure that an implantable defibrillator is safe and effective, it's assigned a Class 3 designation. Class 2 devices are those that pose a moderate level of risk. For example, an electrocardiograph machine can potentially cause harm by displaying wrong information, or by accidentally shocking someone through its leads due to an electrical fault. But these are things that are either unlikely to occur, or unlikely to cause harm when they do occur, and protecting against these problems is relatively well understood, so the FDA assigns them a Class 2 designation. Most medical devices used by healthcare professionals are Class 2 devices. Class 1 devices include things like tongue depressors, which pose little chance of harm in their intended use, so planning, review, and testing are minimal. The EU has similar classifications, other than breaking Class 2 into Classes 2A and 2B, based, again, largely on risk. Most other countries have similar classification schemes. The take-home point is this. Medical devices are assigned a general classification based on their inherent risk, and the path they follow through R&D and into production is impacted significantly by this classification. Most medical standards ask the practitioner to take risk into account in various ways. As anyone who's used a computer can attest to, software has the opportunity to fail often and spectacularly. As we'll see in a future video, IEC 62304, the medical device software standard typically used these days, classifies software's general risk as Class A, B, or C. Moving away from the general and toward the specific, practically every device can fail in various ways, and some of those ways can potentially cause harm. During the development process, there should be formal reviews of these potential failure modes and some quantification of the degree of harm that they can be expected to cause. Once we have these quantified, we can decide which risks to focus our time and money on mitigating. The formal process typically used for this is called an FMEA, for Failure Modes and Effects Analysis. There are also other techniques that can be useful here, such as FTA, or fault tree analysis. This brings us to the first in our core group of medical device standards, ISO 14971, titled Application of Risk Management to Medical Devices. This is a fundamental standard that addresses how risk should be systematically managed throughout the product lifecycle. Following ISO 14971 is required for a medical device CE mark in the EU. The FDA has also formally recognized 14971 as a way to fulfill its own requirements around risk management, so most device makers choose to conform to this standard in order to meet both EU and US requirements. 14971 is also referenced by a number of other standards, such as ISO 60601-1 and IEC 62304, which are themselves basic safety standards that we'll discuss more in future videos. Standards referencing other standards is not unusual. That concludes the second installment in our overview of core medical device standards. I hope that it was helpful. If you have any questions or comments, please feel free to contact me at medtechnerd@gmail.com or visit my blog at www.medtechnerd.com.